Let's talk about declining birth rates. I think that makes more sense relative to talking about population growth, immigration, and again, why this is why it could be important, and again, how it's going to affect real estate over the next couple decades, Matt.
So this article really kind of sketches over how, whether it's lower birth rates, having children later in life, regional differences in migration, all these kind of and really the uncertain factor of immigration that we just covered, that was unmentioned in this article, but it was definitely worth mentioning. It's really just a lot of these different considerations that happen at the intersection of housing and population growth. And these are very much like kind of ground level stuff. For instance, like maybe people are going to move they're going to be moving around, so they'll move from a higher cost of living with a little house to a lower cost of living with a big house. It's a slow burn for a lot of these population trends, but I think that it's difficult to get a sense of where things are moving if you're always looking from day to day. And it's nice to have this reminder that, oh wow, this is how much births there were by decade. In the 2020s, 37 million. That's the projection. 39 million in the 2010s. In the 2000s, 41 million. Now that 41 million is particularly relevant because those are the people that are probably renting age at this point. You don't, and what's interesting is you don't see a number like that 41 million until the 1950s. So is that me, or is that, is Gen Z more births in that decade? The Gen Z decade has more births than the 1950s baby boomer decade? And that puts the lie to my whole declining demographics thing. So it's a little encouraging. Again, I would be encouraged by some of these population growth trends. It's not as, we're not crashing into a cliff, but yes, it's a little
that it's flat.
Yeah.
It's a little flat, but it's not as dire as it could be, because there were a lot of births in the 2000s. But since then, over the last 2 decades, there has been declining. Again, it was worse in the 1970s. It was slower in the 1940s and the 30s, but obviously then we're going back 100 years at that point. And the overall population was a little bit smaller as well, and they were having more kids at that point as well. So our population certainly has grown, but we're having less kids. And so if you think about it that way, like our population is much larger in the United States than it was in the 1950s, but we're having about the same amount of kids.
Yeah.
So the volume is there, but it's really that rate, which is not great. But what is this? I think obviously looking at future population growth and, just how many heads are there? How many beds do we need for all the heads? Beds for heads. But also, a whole idea that people, it says women, but like people, persons, whatever's politically correct, Matt, have
childbearing people.
Childbearing people. They are having kids later in their life. Where in the 1990s, birth rates were the highest among women 25 to 29, but by 2023, women aged 30 to 34 had the highest birth rates.
Wow.
That's a big shift.
Yeah.
And what that also, I think, means for apartments is, there's having a kid. If you have kids, you know that, having your first child is there's no other life event that I think changes you more than that. Because even getting married, it's like official, but you've had that same relationship, and it's just, the status has changed. You change it on Facebook or whatever and go down to the courthouse.
Starting my job at Great Capital.
Yeah, there we go. But
I agree.
Tell the twins that. But having a kid, you have to think a little bit differently, and specifically, just logistically, you need more space usually.
Yep.
Like you need it. Like, often it's nice to have another bedroom, and you just need more room. You need to spread out because you're getting the toys and the stuff. You need all the gear.
And you don't want, maybe you don't want to share a wall with someone if you can afford it.
Yeah, you start asking yourself questions of, what kind of life do I want my kids to live? I was fine sleeping on the mattress in the corner, but like, do I want it? Well, I see my kids sleeping on the mattress in the corner? Maybe not.
And maybe you're making decisions about, well, do I want to commute to work now and move to a school district or move to a place that has cheaper houses so that,
all of these questions start emerging in your brain. And so again, it's a decision of saying, okay, I was in an apartment. Now I need to think about buying a house. There's a reason to go and buy a house, even though houses are hard to buy right now. But again, even taking the affordability out of it, this is really looking at choices, life choices.
Yeah.
What this means to me is individuals are going to be staying in apartments longer because the decision to have kids is often highly correlated with the decision to buy a if we're going to be spending a lot of money, why not just destroy the budget, buy a house and have a kid? But so if you're not going to have a kid until you're 30 to 34, that means that you might be staying in an apartment for a couple more years. And that means there are historical understanding of what demand is and just that consumer behavior, we need to adjust our thinking. And there's going to be some slightly older individuals living in apartments. It's not just going to be folks that are graduating from college and the current Gen Zers. But it's going to be a little bit of a wider mix. And I think that this is positive for multifamily for the decades to come. There could be a reversion back. I mean, there's like could snap back, and people having kids much earlier and having a lot more kids. I mean, there's sort of that. There's some like inklings of like a movement for that, I think, for some people, but I think it's pretty niche.
No, I completely agree. I think that, yes, like affordability is preventing a lot of, I used to say this so many, would-be home buyers. It's preventing would-be home buyers
would have been home buyers.
And that is an effect that is very, very valid. It's real. But I think a lot of times the affordability issues mean that, man, you've got to find a home. So maybe you're moving out. Maybe the home's going to be smaller. There's a lot of different ways that people can solve the affordability. Now, I agree. For a lot of people, it's unsolvable. But there are options. If you can't afford this house, well, there are other houses out there sometimes for a lot of people. It's just hard to talk about, and kind of going back to the Harvard Joint Center Housing Studies, it's hard to talk about affordability without painting a little bit of a broad brush. But I do think that when you're talking about birth rates and population growth, and especially life stages, I feel like for any given person, it's not necessarily the amount of money that you're making that's going to say, all right, it's time to buy a house. It could just be that's where your life is. There's a lot of rich people that rent apartments, maybe because they're in a different stage of life. Almost positive they're lifestyle renters. They have a different lifestyle. Maybe when you have kids, your style of life is going to be different. You're going to buy a home. So I think that's a really valid factor to think about. Frankly, just the age of someone.
It'll be interesting if it'll be interesting to see how kind of the BTR, those developments, the build to rent that progresses, because those starting to pick up before the pandemic. But it makes sense because there's going to be folks that, again, having the family, need the space, but you don't want to or can't afford to purchase a home outright, and what finance it can't afford the more down payment or the mortgage payment, and renting might just make a lot more sense even if it's for a family and you're getting the same essentially type of product. You just might not be able to make as many of your own holes in the wall, but believe me, if you've got kids, the holes in the walls will find their way there.
Some are bigger than others.
Some are big. Some are easier to fix. So this is from Apartment List, and it's about these super commuters. We've talked about these folks in the past. It's sort of related to work from home, but the opposite. We've added 600,000 super commuters in 2022. First off, Matt, this was the graph that I found interesting, and because it kind of marks the trough of, or the peak, I don't know, however you want to describe it, from working from home, when commuters, and this is super commuters, but I think there's a big old correlation, slowly growing, from 2010 all the way to 2019, but all of a sudden, when the pandemic happened, it went from basically 3.1% of commuters who travel 90 plus minutes to and from work. That dropped down to 2.4% in 2021. That made sense. Again, a lot of people, if you're commuting, you're, the term essential worker got so, I don't even know what it means anymore. But you've got to be wherever you got to be. You're doing some physical work maybe, or just your presence is required, as all jobs used to be. But a lot of people are still going to have to, make that commute. I mean, if you're a framer or plumber, you're not doing it over Zoom. So you're still having to drive a ways. Now but it has reversed from 2021. We have seen a reversal. Now it's 2 points in 2022. So we're missing a year and a half of data. But in 2022, that number bumped up to 2.7%, coming closer to the trend of 2019. The 2019 level of 3.1%, and really back at the 2018 level, which was at 2.9.
Yeah, it does seem like from 2021 to 2022, that jump off signals maybe it's return to the office, or at the very least like a reduction in remote work. And it will be interesting to see the implications, because I think it does have clear implications for the development and growth of suburbs. Maybe more people are living in the suburbs, but also for the activity downtown. Because if you're commuting, well, where are you going? And probably going to downtown. This is interesting as it relates to remote work, and maybe not necessarily the length of a commute specifically. I wonder how much of this is driven by just flipping the on switch. I'm going to work now. Although it's interesting to see, if you looked at that chart from 2014 to whenever, the amount of distance, the amount of supercommuters increased from 2010 to 2019. At the same time, there was also a gradual increase in remote work, but it was just, I think that it was such a sharp difference during the pandemic, that change. And I think that it was a little bit of a zero-sum game where it did eat into the commuters. A lot of those commuters started becoming remote work, and now they're flipping back on.
Yeah. And I guess a better article or headline for this article would have been, gains back 600,000 super commuters rather than they've gained, because we used to have even more.
Yeah.
Okay, or they represented a larger share.